We are, it is 6:02, and we're going to go ahead and call our meeting to order at 6:02. Dr. Thomas, if you would conduct roll call for us.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, Mr. Davis, Miss Gallagher,
Here.
Miss Davis,
Here.
Dr. Yeager,
Here.
Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
Dr. Anderson,
Here.
Dr. Gant,
Here.
Attorney Hull, and Dr. Maddox.
Okay. Thank you. So we do have a quorum, but can someone confirm that for me?
We have 6.
Okay, all right. And I know Mr. Davis will not be able to join us tonight, and Dr. Maddox will call in if she's able to. All right. Okay, we'll move forward to item number 2, which is to amend or adopt the agenda. The floor is open.
I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, thank you. That was a motion made by Ms. Davis, a second by Dr. Dykeman. Are there any questions or is there any further discussion? Okay, Dr. Thomas, if you would take roll for those that are in favor of adopting our agenda.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis, Miss Gallagher,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman,
Yes.
Dr. Anderson,
Yes.
Dr. Gant,
Yes.
Attorney Hull, and Dr. Maddox.
Okay. All right, thank you. So that motion carries, and that means that the agenda that we have before us is what we will be following. We'll move forward to item number 3. These are our informational items. We'll start with item 31, which is our Athens Community Career Academy report that was provided for us. If you clicked on that, you have been able to read through that report that has previous minutes, search updates, and things of that nature. But I'll just open the floor if there are any additional questions or discussion on the document the updates that were provided in the document.
So I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner, but I did read the minutes. And I saw where there's some work to be done at the Career Academy that I'm not relative. It seemed like it was relative to expanding once the board moves out. Has that been something that is there a particular driver for that, or do we know any more about that? Or was it just a placeholder for what they hope to do in the future?
I just know that one of the areas they were looking to expand related to the culinary program, and they wanted to make some changes in the kitchen area. And then I do know that some of the space areas have been kind of tight with us there. We have had to quadruple up, honestly, have 3 and 4 people in spaces. I know they lost some space as a result of the lab that was going in on the first floor. And so that took 2 other classrooms out. So it may be related to the space that they knew that they had already lost and just trying to spread out a little more. Now that is just based on the areas that I know about, Ms. Davis.
That's fine. That's a great beginning because you triggered my thought. I thought it said something about moving the culinary part or some part of the culinary program.
So they're trying to expand that kitchen in the area because right now we have a CCSD, like cafeteria serving kitchen there. So there's limited space for the culinary program to do their course work. So they're hoping to be able to expand there. And we're looking at, and Mr. Gilbert is on the line, so he could probably speak to this better than I can, but looking at moving that cafeteria area to the Early Learning Center.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I've talked to nutrition, and they would like to expand the kitchen function over at Early Learning Center because they have more students over there that they have to serve, and the menu is different. So they're going to look to expand over there. That way they can move over to Early Learning Center, and then we can remodel and renovate the culinary kitchen once nutrition moves out.
Oh, so that would mean just putting in a kitchen at the Early Learning Center and, okay.
We would have to expand and add some refrigerators, freezers, that kind of stuff. That what they have now over at the Career Academy, they don't have over Early Learning. So
I see. That's, thank you. That's really good to know because I thought it was hard that they had to carry their lunches across the driveway. So does that mean that they would be self-contained in terms of preparing food and serving it there?
yes.
What about the 2 classrooms they occupy now at the Career Academy? Will those also move back over there or is there no space for that?
There's no space for that right now.
Okay, thank you.
And that is a priority for me just for safety reasons. So once we continue to explore how we will maximize other properties that we have in Clark County, I have asked, and Ms. Higginbotham, of course, is always on this call, but she and I have talked extensively about those classes needing to move across the street. So hopefully some of the property availability that we have will allow us to be able to consolidate and have all of those early learning classes in that building instead of split between HT Edwards and that part of the campus.
So I don't want to cripple the Career Academy because I know they absolutely love having those 2 classrooms for their students. So yeah, I was just curious.
Yes, and it's safer for
anything, not suggesting anything.
right. It's safer for high schoolers to walk over to them than for our little ones to have to walk over to early learning. So
I see. Thank you very much. It seemed like an odd thing. I hadn't heard anything about that, but I appreciate that.
Okay. All right, we will move forward. Were there any other questions about that? Okay, we'll move forward with item 3.2, which is our SPLOST monthly report. Are there any follow-up questions or further discussion about this report?
I have a question about extracurricular. The 2.5 million that's going to be moved into high school athletics.
We've already, I think you're looking at originally we had budgeted 2.5 million for the extracurricular. We've since amended that to do the 4.8 million at Clark Central, and then the I think it was 850,000 over at Cedar Shoals. So that was an old budget number, and we've we're doing the increased budget number with the increased scope. So
that's at is that the tracks or is that something new?
Tracks and stadium. Yep.
Okay, you know what I would like to see on that report, and I don't know if I'm the only one, but could we have some dates on the projects that are completed to give that a bit of a perspective, because maybe that's just a column that's not being printed out in the report.
Yeah, I think the one you're looking at is the financial report, so that's got all the money. But we can put, and I think it has in progress or completed.
Right. Yeah, I'm just looking for a date to go with those.
Okay. Yeah, it's in the write-up portion of it, but we can see about adding it to that as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, we'll move forward with the early head start. Policy Council meeting minutes and reports. Any follow-up questions or discussion?
I don't have any notes on that one.
Okay. Thank you for this information. And as always, if you have any questions or follow-up before the meeting, but definitely also after the meeting, please be sure to follow up with Dr. Thomas with those questions. If you think of any after reading through what we have before us. We'll move forward with our board community reports. Item 4.1, that's the Athens Area Community Foundation. Any updates there?
That's Dr. Maddox. I don't know if
Mhm.
he has made it on. It doesn't look like that.
Yeah, and I don't think let's see. I don't see her. I was trying to recall from our update from last year. I'm sorry, last month. I have not had any share it with me. And Dr. Maddox, I'm sure she will share any updated notes with us as she receives them. Okay, we'll move forward with our community oversight SPLOST report.
Thank you, Dr. Gant. So the COC met on January 12th. We had a robust meeting. It lasted 2 hours or more. And many of the updates are in the printed SPLOST report, but highlights included updates on the Career Academy, the radio safety being established in some of the schools, considering the board option purchase versus lease and whether we had enough money to do the purchase outright. There's going to be substantial investment in some of the renovations, so I expect we'll get a recommendation soon about whether we should purchase or lease outright. Mr. Fisher, we discussed the existence of the property committee because I knew that we were in that discussion. Mr. Fisher recommended that we retain the opportunity for him to have a sounding board and not have to bring everything to the full board. But I think we discussed that in our retreat last week. We also talked about having a rotating board member come through and visit the COC every month to see how it operates. I think there's a lot of mystery about how this committee works and what its mission is. And so we thought that that would be a really good way for people to understand better what's going on. And so Alex Sams is gonna offer invitations to board members. He also made a presentation at our local new board member orientation last week, and I think did a really nice job of sharing the COC mission with at least myself and our three other new board members. I think they had some really good questions and those questions were answered. So again, I think his idea of having board members come through and at least visit the COC meetings is a really good idea. We talked about West Broad and maintaining the early learning emphasis that we've heard from the community as a priority. And so we're still anxiously awaiting for the opportunity to have that local building committee meet together in person one day, hopefully, to start that process. Other notes that I have that are relevant are Allison Wright talked about School C and needing to work on with the city on housing permits and really hone in on the needs of School C or not, and where that falls. We talked about H.T. Edwards space and possibility of building a historic room for parents, having committee meetings and things, partly in association with the early learning center. Since the parent role in the early learning center is really important, we thought we needed to make sure we have a space for them to meet. There was a facilities review. The 5-year plan with the Georgia DOE is underway. What else? Plans for SPLOST 6, what kinds of things people are thinking about. I know Mr. Gilbreth is working with the schools to find out what their high priority needs are, and that process will start this coming year. Finally, the financial report shows that we're in very good shape. We monthly finances came in at monthly receipts came in at 2.2 million, which is, I think, actually above last year's value. So we're in good shape in terms of the finances for SPLOST. And then just finally, February 9th is our next meeting. So if someone wants to attend, I'd be happy to get you an invitation.
So are those meetings open to the public?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, they're not recorded and broadcast, but anyone who wants to attend could, I'm sure, just plug in and get the Zoom.
Well, thank you. And I'm really excited to hear that the new members got the overview or orientation on the COC. I've not had that either. So was that recorded by chance in that orientation?
Was it recorded? I don't know. Dr. Thomas, did we record the new member orientation?
I don't think the new member training was recorded. No, ma'am.
Okay, well,
I'm just
Ms.
looking
Davis,
at the COC presentation part, because I can't find anything that tells me what that is and what our relationship is with the COC.
okay, well, I'd be happy to put you in touch with Mr. Sams, or you and I can talk offline. I'm trying to remember if I took any screenshots of his presentation. It was a little bit of a slideshow, as I recall, wasn't it, Dr. Thomas?
Yes.
I wonder if other
And
people would be interested too. I'm sorry.
Ms. Palmer, I don't know if she has that slideshow or if he was projecting from his own screen, but we can find out.
I have it all. I can share.
Okay, we can share that with you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Dr. Yeager, what time does the February 9th meeting take place?
I believe we start at 8:30.
I'd like to participate.
Okay, get you an invitation.
Thank you.
Ms. Davis, would you like to also attend, or should we just do one at a time?
February, I'd love to. I just don't know. 8:30, February 9th. I'll check my calendar. I'd love to attend. Yeah, because I want to understand more about it. It's Community Oversight Committee, right?
Yes, ma'am. And I'm
Okay.
just a representative. I don't do a lot of talking except as a representative of the district, of the board.
Well, no, that was what, again, I'm always looking for those connections between Envision Athens and other things that are happening in the community. So that's my curiosity.
Great. Yeah, you should come.
Where can you find the link? Where can regular people find the link to?
I don't think we
participate
make
or to
it
watch?
public. I don't think we make it public, but if someone wants to attend, I'm sure they would be welcome. We don't just broadcast the link as a public, I mean, it would be chaos with Zoom, but actually oftentimes it's in Google Space. But if someone wants to attend, just tell them to reach out, and I'm sure
Who
Mr.
did they
Sams,
reach out to?
me or Mr. Sams. Well, just say me because I'm easier to find maybe.
Okay.
Or Mr. Galbraith says yes, he could do it too. Sorry,
Yeah,
you're waving over there, and I'm
I
not
send
being.
I send the link out. So yeah, just email me and I can I'll patch you in on the link.
Great.
Okay. Thank you. We'll move forward to, let's see, is this Envision Athens?
Oh my goodness, we had an administrative meeting today because there's been concern. There were a couple of things that we were trying to address as an organization in terms of going forward in progress. So that meeting was held today and the minutes came out. And what I will do is share with the board the meeting notes from that meeting, because included in that was a link to, and I don't know, maybe some of you are already familiar with Amani Tarter, but she did a great blog on being in Athens and the Envision Athens and the whole story around its purpose and its values and how to engage in the community. It was so moving. I really want to share that with you. And so I will definitely do that when we get off of this call. I just didn't get through all of my email yet to start forwarding things. But Envision Athens is doing very well. This year, our theme or our focus is on celebrating community. And so right now we're accepting applications or nominations, if you will, for Good Neighbor Awards. And so that will be a part of that report that of the notes that I send to you. So think about people that you would want to recognize who absolutely embody the values for Envision Athens. And I encourage you to submit names after the MLK Day event. I personally am going to be submitting some names because of the great support we had at the Brooklyn Cemetery Restoration Project. You wouldn't believe the generosity of this community, so I'll definitely share that with you. That's my report.
Okay. Thank you for your report. All right, we'll move forward with the Georgia School Boards Association. I don't have any updates at this time. Okay, we'll move forward to item 4, which is the President's Report. There are 2 things that I just wanted more so to notify the, one, to notify the public of, and then secondly, the board. First is, I know at our last meeting, we decided to postpone our committee selections. And so we, at our retreat last week, we had a pretty, I think, fruitful discussion about our committees. And there are some changes that there was some consensus around. And some of that included condensing our committees and aligning the ones that are remaining to our strategic plan. But at this time, we do have those new committees and the people that will be a part of those committees. We have a draft of that, but at this current time, we are going to remain on the committees that we are a part of. At least I think we said until March. I don't know if someone can correct me, so that we can finish some of the work, a lot of the work that has already been started that we are very close to finishing, particularly with policy and things of that nature. And so we will work to keep the district and the public updated on those changes to our committees. But that's the update with our committees. And as it relates to our trainings, if you recall, the 4th Thursday of each month, at least for this semester, will be, we've set aside for training. And so just want to let the board know I will be hoping to send out a draft of those tentative trainings based on the feedback that was provided last semester around areas of need, as well as our cognitive report and our self-assessment. And so the goal is to try to incorporate at least a training from each of those as we move forward. And so I hope to have an update. There are a couple other people I need to speak with to confirm that they're available on those days, as well as just cost information, just so that the board can have all of that basically in one document. So those are my updates. If I left anything out as it relates to the committee, I am going to welcome the board to add any information that I left out. Okay. All right.
So I actually have a question, sorry. Will we vote on those committees on a week from now, or will we wait until March to vote on them? Don't we have to, no, we don't have to vote on them, right? Sorry, the policy says we don't have to vote on them. We'll just establish them. All right, thank you, sorry.
Right. And from my understanding, I think, was that Dr. Yeager?
Yeah.
I think from my understanding, any action that's taken will probably be through policy. So for instance, you know how we have those descriptions of the committees, those may change as our committees have shifted a little bit. And so I would imagine that the action to be taken will be through policy, but historically, we have not voted, I don't think, on committees. We've just selected them.
Thank you.
And I think we have historically, we present that the February meeting. I thought, now I may be wrong, but I thought that changes to the committee had to be approved by the board, by the full board. That was what I hadn't read in the policy that I had. So I don't know, I'll check it again.
Yeah, I thought when Ms. Palmer went back and checked for us to see if it was on our agenda from last year, maybe the year before last, that we did not.
And I think those were normal years.
Well, I wasn't, you know, like, I don't know, someone may be able to provide a more historical view. And certainly correct me if I'm wrong, that we have taken action on the committee selections. I remember when we decided, we simply walked up to a board during, I think, a work session and said, hey, we want to sign up for this committee. But I don't know, Mr. Pruitt or any other people with memories better than mine.
And the policy says that the members, chairs, and vice chairs will be determined through consensus of the board. So I suppose that's interpreted as not requiring a vote.
Okay. And so what I interpret that as is the general committee makeup is simply we decide that. And then once those committees are determined by people volunteering to be on those committees, that committee itself, they decide by consensus who's going to be the vice president and the president.
Okay. Maybe that all changed when we went from an appointed board to however we're doing it now. Selected board. Okay. I'm good.
Ms. Palmer put in the chat that we did not vote last year or the year before. I just recall us signing up on the different sheets of paper that were taped up the stairway, but she said we did not vote the last 2 years.
Okay. Well, and if we need to vote, Mr. Pruitt, if you see something differently, you and Dr. Yeager, from looking through the policy, I think it would just be a matter of us adding it to the, whenever we're done, like serving in our current roles, we would simply add that to the agenda for either March's meeting or what have you. So if we're incorrect, please let us know. All right, we will, that's all for me. We'll move forward to item number 5, which is, item number 6, which is the superintendent's report. Dr. Thomas?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Gant. The first that I just wanted to share is that our former board attorney, Mr. Terrell Benton, passed on Sunday, January 31st. He served as our board attorney from 1982 through 2012. So he was a part of the Clark County School District family for an extensive period of time. And after he stepped down from that role, that was when Attorney Pruitt began working with the school district. And so we just wanted to acknowledge his passing and offer our sympathy to his personal family as well as his professional family at the law firm that he served. I wanted to just give a brief disparity study update. I met yesterday with Mr. Schuneman, and I say yesterday, I think it was yesterday, and Ms. Veronica Jackson and Attorney Pruitt, and we are going to move forward where she's preparing a RFP. She has talked to a couple of other school districts. She reached out to UGA, and as you all know, we had consulted with ACC government regarding their work in that area, and they had hired someone specifically to be responsible for that work for the Athens Clark Unified Government. So we are moving forward with preparing a RFP, and it will have a couple of different options for us to consider in terms of addressing disparity, but I wanted to provide that update. Next, I have Mr. Gaskins is available, as is Nurse Amy Rourke, to talk with you about our school reopening plans. We have been working diligently to monitor numbers after this last spike, and we're looking at numbers per 100,000 as well as positivity rates for our community. And I'll allow Nurse Rourke can share with you what we're seeing with those numbers over the last week or so. And I just want people to know that I, as well as our cabinet, all are very committed to returning students to school. And we continue to meet daily with our team to address potential barriers. We are particularly committed to our students with special needs and our high school students who have not had the opportunity to attend school since we got out last March. And so that's not to say we're not concerned about all of the kids, but those are two groups that have been really at the forefront of our mind. We have received several emails, and we are very understanding of families' concerns and an eagerness for students to get back, and the students and their needs to get back from an academic perspective as well as social emotionally. So Mr. Gaskins is going to share with you our proposed plan for return. And I did wanted to clarify that there's been some confusion based on interpretation of the last communication that went out that we would be returning on Monday, and that is not accurate, but you will get clarity on that from him. So he has a brief presentation this evening that should shed light on our next steps, in addition to Nurse Amy Rourke, and I'm not sure someone else had anything in that presentation, Mr. Gaskins, but I'll turn it over to you and Nurse Amy.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm sorry. I was just making sure that I had the right presentation. As you know, we have presented several times. I believe this is the right one with just the wrong title page, but we will continue. So our agenda, as Dr. Thomas said, is that we will receive some updates from Nurse Amy from our Office of School Nursing. And we will also, I will walk us through some instructional services and school performance updates. And then we'll talk about next steps. So I'll turn it over to you, Nurse Amy.
Thank you, Mr. Gaskins. Are we sharing the slideshow?
Yes, ma'am. I thought I was sharing on my end.
Good evening, Dr. Gant and members of the board. Thank you again for this opportunity to talk with you guys for a few brief minutes about COVID and how it's looking in our community, as well as a couple updates around vaccination efforts for our staff members, as well as COVID testing. If we can just click on that Clark County monitoring data, I would like to just remind everyone that the school district is following the CDC indicator thresholds for a safe return to school. And this is a dashboard that we look at every day. I don't think it's new to you guys. I've shared it with you before. However, just to point out today, we are in the 700s, and we have been for the last few days when it comes to cases per 100,000 over the last 14 days here in Clark County. And we would like that number ideally to be less than 200 for a full-fledged 5-day face-to-face, return. That's the number that we've kind of been hoping to hit for a while now, but we haven't here 200 in quite some time. You can see that our positivity rate, which is the next number, is 11.9%. Actually, today our positivity rate is 10%, and our cases per 100,000 are 710. So the numbers on the screen are yesterday's data, and we continue to move in a downward trend. Is been pretty high for us here lately is our ICU bed usage in Region E, and everybody is well aware that our hospitals do serve our surrounding counties as well. Our ICU bed usage is at 98.8% today or yesterday, which is critically high. It has been unfortunately over 100% for a couple weeks, so we are also seeing decreases in that. And I would just like to reiterate that while our numbers are still critically high, and they are, it is important to acknowledge that we are also seeing a decrease in cases. So if you can look at the graph that's shown there, the peak of that kind of second surge that we're seeing, or third surge, right there exactly, is January 13th. These are our cases per 100K in Clark County. And since January 13th, we have seen a pretty steady decline, as you can see. So we are hoping that our community trends in that direction and continues to decline in cases per 100,000, as well as our positivity rate. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but with the implementation of a vaccination effort for members of our community, we hope that we will continue to see downward trends. Thank you for sharing that graphic. As far as the CCSD vaccination effort, this has been something that we've been working very hard on, and we are coordinating with multiple partners in our community. So we want to be prepared and ready to vaccinate our staff as soon as possible. You all are likely aware that the state of Georgia is in phase 1A+ right now, and teachers and school staff will be included in the vaccination effort when we transition to 1B. The date of that transition is unknown. The supply chain issue in Georgia is a current barrier. That being said, we have multiple partners on board, ready and waiting to vaccinate CCSD staff. We have an action plan ready to go so that the moment that the state transitions to phase 1B, the school district can put in motion our plan to do a staff vaccination effort. At this time, vaccinations are not required by staff in the state of Georgia, but they are optional, and it is a service that we would, and a convenience that we would like to offer our staff, as we believe that the COVID vaccination is a necessary effort for a safe return to school as soon as we can get the effort going based on the state's tiers. So again, hopefully we will transition to 1B soon, and I can guarantee you that the school district will be ready for that transition as soon as it happens. As far as student and staff COVID testing, I've been working on this as well, because the consensus in our general community is it's hard to find a COVID test right now. And it's hard to manage COVID if folks don't have access to testing. So we are working again with a few different partnerships, one of which is UGA, to try and increase the access to COVID testing for our CCSD staff and families. So we're not exactly sure what this will look like at this time, but we are in conversations around allowing appointments for CCSD staff and families at UGA sites, for working with medical students to allow for testing in our schools for symptomatic individuals. So students and staff who may present to the school clinic symptomatic, is there a way that we can run a quick COVID test on site for the individual? And then the final testing piece that we are looking into is surveillance testing. Is there a way that we can do kind of a general testing of asymptomatic individuals in our schools? And we may or may not end up rolling that out, but those conversations are underway, because we really believe that in order to return face-to-face, we need to increase our mitigation measures. Given that our current community numbers are still high in Clark County, we want to make sure that we put additional measures in place to have staff and students prepared for a safe return to school. So that's my update for this evening. I appreciate your time, and feel free to email me with any questions, as always.
Thank you, Amy. And so with the information that Amy has shared with us, we met with principals earlier today at 4 o'clock, and earlier this week, I believe on Tuesday, just to talk about our instructional model moving forward. So one thing that we talked about with our principals, and what is a commitment to our community, is that we want to be able to return to a full 5-day return before the end of the year. And we feel like there are two pathways in which to do that. One is from having our staff vaccinated, as Amy talked about. And once that vaccine is available to our staff, we have already started working on plans to vaccinate them and return back as soon as possible. The other is a decrease in the positivity rate. So as we wait on staff vaccinations, there's also an opportunity that our numbers will continue to decline. And if those numbers continue to decline, where there's a positivity rate below 5% or less than 200 per 100,000, we may also see a full 5-day return in that scenario as well. And there's just a note that we may return our special ed students to a 5-day return if the positivity rate is a little higher than 5%, because we can implement mitigation efforts for our special needs classes that we can't mitigate in other classrooms. So before we can get to a 5-day return, we have created an instructional model that supports a return for our students that I'll go over in this chart. So at the top of the chart, we have identified our student groups. So we have our special ed group, which is adaptive. That also includes our deaf and hard of hearing students. That includes our Office of Early Learning students that receive adaptive services, as well as our Compass and Rise program. Our next group is our Office of Early Learning, which would include our general education students and our grades pre-K through second grade students. We have our grades 3 through 5 students, our grades 6 through 8 students, and our high school students. So we have broken their return back into 4 phases. So in phase 1, and as we define hybrid and will only impact our adaptive population and our high school population. We will not have a hybrid schedule for our Office of Early Learning pre-K through 8th grade students, and I'll explain more in just one second. But as we look at our phase 1, we will return our special education students 2 to 4 days per week. So we have worked with our special ed executive director and her coordinators, and they've made the recommendation that based on students' exceptionality, they will return for Monday, Tuesday, or they will return for Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday. Wednesday will be a remote learning day, which will be a blend of synchronous, live, or asynchronous instruction. So we will have a gradual increase of in-person days as appropriate. So those students that are attending just Monday, Tuesday, as we continue to look at our positivity rate and hopefully have had some success with our return, we are very open to increasing the number of days that those students will be in person. And then the same thing for those students that are 4 days. Ultimately, our plan is to have everyone at 5 days. So phase 1 will begin February 15th. While our adaptive students and those programs that fall in special ed are returning, the rest of our students will continue with remote learning. Our phase 2 will include our adaptive students as well as our Office of Early Learning and grades pre-K through second grade. We will bring in all of those students for 4 days a week, Monday and Tuesday, and Thursday and Friday, with Wednesday being a remote learning day. Our middle grade students, grades 3 through 5, and our middle school students, as well as our high school students, will remain in remote learning. Phase 2 will last for 2 weeks, and then we will start phase 3 March 15th. March 15th will include all of our elementary school students, adding grades 3 through 5, and we will also bring back our high school students in phase 3 starting on March 15th. We will not have a 2-week break between phase 3 and phase 4. The following week, we will bring back our middle school students, and then at this time, by March 22nd, all students will be back in school. Something to note about our high school is they're going to have a phased-in cohort model, gradually increasing in-person days as appropriate. So as you all know, our high schools are very large. Our high school students have not had an opportunity to be back in the building yet. Our high school leaders are planning on a phased-in process where they will split students into different cohorts. And that cohort might start 1 day per week, increase to 2 days per week, until they are at 4 days per week, and then 5 days per week. We are still working on that information because we will have to allow our high school students to register for either in-person instruction or virtual instruction. But we are very excited that we do have some initial planning to bring our high school students back. And we will still provide a virtual option available to families for the remainder of the year. So if families are still anxious about returning their students to in-person, they will still have the virtual option. As we dig a little deeper into special education, I just wanted to add this slide to give you more information. As I said before, they will have a 2-week phase-in plan. It was very important to our special education leaders that those buildings had reduced mitigation of staff and students for a safe return for our profound and fragile student population. When we talk about the programming, it includes our adaptive population. It includes our special education pre-kindergarten population. We have a KBER classroom, which is a partnership with UGA. We have our Compass and RISE classroom. And then we have our deaf and hard of hearing classrooms that we partner with our RISA. 16 campus sites will be impacted with a special education return. That's 11 elementary school sites, including our Office of Early Learning, 3 middle school sites, and our 2 comprehensive high schools. Just some additional information that the reopening registration that our parents did in January, we will reopen that registration. We are working with our student information. We will reopen that registration on Monday, and then it will close on Friday. And so we work with principals today, and principals will also engage parents at the conference day around their registration if they have not elected one. So we want everyone to make their selection by Friday, because it takes a lot of work, especially at our middle and high school as it relates to master scheduling. But anyone that has not made their registration, although I'm encouraging them to do that, we will re-engage them to make sure that they selected one during the conference day in February. And then this instructional model selection will last until the end of the school year. Our elementary and our middle school bell schedules will remain the same. Our high schools will have a reduced school schedule. It will be from 9 to 1 p.m. We have been hit very, very hard in our transportation department as it relates to COVID. And the only way that we could bring all 3 groups back is by having a reduced schedule for our high school students. And then our other commitment as we continue to improve with feedback from our students, our teachers, our families, is that students will receive synchronous and asynchronous instruction when they're not in school. So in the past, when it was a remote learning day, that was an asynchronous day. That has not worked for all of our stakeholders. So we have given some guidance and some autonomy to our school leaders to make sure that there is a balance of live and recorded instruction or independent instruction for students. As we just talk about our instructional model and how it impacts some additional mitigation efforts, as Nurse Amy mentioned, we're going to provide the vaccine to all staff that want it. We will have smaller numbers of students and staff in building for an extended amount of time. In our previous reopening, we brought back K through 8, everyone at the same time. In this new model, we will have half the number of staff and students for at least 2 weeks, and we hope that that helps us with mitigation. Wednesday will be designated as a cleaning day, an opportunity to conduct contact tracing if needed. When we came back from the Thanksgiving holiday, when that spike occurred, the need for contact tracing also occurred, and we could not keep up. And so we believe that having a day in the schedule where our custodial staff can clean and Nurse Amy and her team can contact trace would be beneficial to our students and our staff. And Nurse Amy mentioned that COVID testing for symptomatic staff and students in a planned partnership with UGA. And then we're going to provide additional face shields for all staff. So we have already provided face masks. We have also ordered 5,000 face shields. So staff will have face shields and face masks to use in their classrooms. So that is our update. And Dr. Thomas, I will refer to you as we entertain any questions and talk about next steps.
Yes, sir. I was actually typing in the chat, responding to Dr. Yeager about the 5%. So trying to get to that initial target is where we hope to be to resume a full normal return back, but that is not the plan to wait to that point. to have any face-to-face. So how Dr. Dykeman responded is accurate. Now we're going to return back with a modified schedule with the mitigation measures we already had in place, but then adding additional mitigations such as the face shields, the opportunities for testing and potential, for vaccination, and then opportunities for on-site testing. Is that correct, Nurse Amy? If we have teachers with medical reasons that they cannot return, then they will continue to have the same options that they had with FMLA. That's correct, right, Mr. Gaskins? If
Yes,
they
ma'am.
have documented medical reasons that they can't return.
Yes, we will continue with those FMLA accommodations.
I think maybe you mean ADA rather than FMLA.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank
Yes.
you.
I'm not the HR person. I'm doing my best, Mike. Yes.
Yes, and I
No,
did
that's
it
okay.
wrong. I'm sorry.
So what I understand was happened before is first there's sort of the tier one of employees who have true ADA disabilities, and they are accommodated first, particularly with assignment to teaching virtually rather than in person. And then there's categories below that of people whose disabilities don't rise or medical issues don't rise to the level of an ADA disability, so they would be accommodated after the first tier or have already been accommodated.
Thank you, Attorney Pruitt.
Dr. Thomas, may I ask a question, or Mr. Gaskins? You mentioned, Dr. Ward mentioned the positivity rate. Can you remind us, what was the positivity rate when we returned? Like when we did the return? Yes. I know there were other factors that were not the same, particularly like some of these factors that you mentioned, like hospital use and things like that. But what was the positivity rate? I asked because from my understanding of what Mr. Gaskin said, that a full return would depend on the positivity rate or vaccination efforts.
Yes. Do you recall where we were, Nurse Amy, when we came back before? I would have to go back and look.
Okay. I can go back and take a look at that presentation. I think Nurse Amy may have mentioned it then. I just didn't know if she remembered.
I just looked it up for quick reference. On November 1st, our positivity rate was 7.9% in Clark County. We would like positivity rate to be less than 5%. We have high as 17 or 18% recently. So we're seeing a nice downward trend with that and hoping to continue in that direction.
Okay, thank you.
So I put a question in the chat, but I guess we're free. Are we? Okay. Could you all walk us through the decision behind delaying middle and high school? So I guess my question is, if the earlier, if the younger students are phasing in sooner, but are doing this Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, I can't remember what the table said, approach to reduce the sizes within the classrooms, why can we not do something similar to that with middle and high schoolers to get them back in the building sooner?
That's a great question, Dr. Anderson. And part of our challenge, because we want them to come back as soon as possible as well, is our staffing and the interruptions in instruction when we don't have the appropriate staff. So one of the things that we receive feedback from our principals is that when we came back with our middle schools, we had some bus issues, bus drivers having to isolate or having to quarantine. And when we did not have enough buses, either students arrived home late or we were afraid that we were not going to be able to socially distance on those buses that are now 48 students compared to 72. And so what our transportation and operations have asked us is that and our principals is, can we do a slower phase in of our middle school and our high school, so we don't have these instances where a bus doesn't show up, or we're trying to socially distance and put additional students on buses. So it's really more of a staffing concern versus the instructional mitigation concern.
How are we on faculty staffing right now? Because I know that as we were closing the last time, I started hearing from people about difficulty in meeting the staffing requirements for the in-person classes while the isolation was going on and the quarantine was happening. Does this phased approach allow us more flexibility in that, or what do we see to mitigate that situation going forward?
So that was one of the things I was going to say, Mr. Gaskins, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but with the phased in approach, it does also allow us to hopefully have increased staffing in terms of substitute needs as we phase in and the rates are coming down. Then hopefully as the rates come down, our staffing continues to go up and we won't have the need. So if we need as many substitutes now with everyone coming back at one time, I think it's going to be difficult to balance. I mean, I'm with you, Dr. Anderson. I would love for them all to be able to come back, but our hope is that as numbers continue to come down, vaccine availability increases, then the number of classes needing coverage will also decrease. But trying to bring everyone back at the same time with some of the same gaps that we have is just going to make it challenging for staffing reasons. And it's strictly about staffing.
Thank you.
And I see Dr. Yeager has asked about outdoor classrooms. I'm not sure right now about outdoor space because of the weather. There are some spaces, that teachers can utilize. I have heard that there is a petition, but I also have heard from a lot of people who are saying our kids need to be back in school. And so trying to balance, and we have really tried to balance, and if we haven't been perfect, but I think as a school district, we have been very cautious and conservative, and not saying, well, everyone else is going back and we shouldn't. I'm not taking that approach, but we have been very cautious and conservative in terms of our return in an effort to protect all of our stakeholders, not just our teachers, but our students, our families, other staff. But at some point, we are going to have to look at what's best for children. And I'm getting just as many as you all probably are, communications from the other side saying, what about our kids? And really being some very strong opinions that we have turned into a system that is not prioritizing the needs of children, but prioritizing the needs of adults over children. And at some point, we're going to have to try to find a balance for that. And again, we have been in school a very small percentage of time compared to everyone around us because we are committed to the safety of everyone that we serve. But at some point, we have to start to try to move forward. And that's where the decision that we've made as a team, very understanding of the needs and the concerns. I've been personally impacted, so I'm not one that doesn't believe in the science, doesn't believe it's real. I know it's real. But we also, again, have multiple voices that we have to consider as we try to move forward with the decision. And we're trying to do this in as safe of a way as possible, offering testing, testing, looking for ways to test individuals who are symptomatic. Nurse Amy has been reaching out, looking at different options for how we can test so that we can have as many mitigation strategies in place as possible.
So have the mitigation strategies changed for our return? Are they gonna still be that stringent 10 days out, once exposure, or have we made some adjustments to that based on the latest CDC guidelines?
You can go ahead, Amy.
Well, my suggestion would be that we revert to the 14-day quarantine per CDC recommendation as the safest option. We have been doing the 10-day quarantine since we started January 1st, started back in January. But I'm putting every safety measure in place that we can as we return to school. And so I think a 14-day quarantine, as recommended by CDC, as the safest option, is something worth considering for the school district.
Thank you.
So going along the lines of mitigation strategies, and I know that Mr. Gaskins talked about face shields for teachers in addition to the other things that you have in the classrooms. And I wondered whether there's been conversation about air purifiers also, and where we've landed on that. So I know that's something, I haven't read the petition, but that is something that I've heard. So I don't know if it's in there, but it's something I've heard from a lot of people.
I've not seen the petition.
Dr.
Is that
Thomas,
okay?
Dr. Thomas, did you hear the question about air purifiers?
I'm sorry, I was trying to respond and read the chat, so I'm trying to keep up, so sorry. No, can you repeat that? And maybe we need to stop using the chat, and because what we have been told in the past is that people who are not in the conversation don't know what's in the chat, and it's very difficult for us to monitor what we're saying in the chat and what's being said verbally. And I'm trying to make sure I'm taking into account what everyone is saying, but then I'm missing things. So thank you, Mr. Gaskins. Can you repeat that?
I was just asking about, because we are trying to increase mitigation efforts and also try to make it as safe as possible to come back. And there's been an addition of face shields for teachers. And I was just asking about if there would be air purifiers, or if there's been conversations about that, or where we've landed on adding air purifiers to classrooms.
We had not revisited that, Dr. Dykeman, but we can revisit that, especially in light of some other developments. So that's something that we can look at and have a conversation in our daily meeting tomorrow.
But I also just think that in terms of air purifiers, I mean, obviously they will be helpful during this time, but I feel like in schools, like, it's also something that we can continue to use even after COVID is hopefully gone.
They're not isolated only to being helpful during the time of COVID.
Right.
Dr. Thomas, can I ask about I know this came up in one conversation. It may have been a conversation either you and I had or somewhere. Dr. Yeager, I think, asked about the outdoor classrooms. I'm also thinking about like funding, right? I know like we're still trying to figure out where funding go, but also I think in one conversation that I had with somebody, LSGTs came up. How are if a school or like if a teacher wants to have like an outdoor classroom, and I know that may not be conducive for all people. Where are LSGTs, I guess, is the best question for me to ask. Have you or your cabinet been able to get a sense of where LSGTs are with their spending and how specifically they may be able to assist with any efforts as teachers and staff return to school?
Mr. Harris, is that something you can speak to with LSGT?
I can. So all of our LSGTs, so it's about a split. Some of our schools have spent some of their grant money on other initiatives to support their students learning this fall and this spring. As you can imagine, there were some high needs that came up this fall that our schools applied for that money for. There are some schools who are applying for funds to build some outdoor spaces and outdoor learning environments. and there are others who are using it to get some tools and supplies for their students and their learning. So it's a mix, Dr. Gant. I mean, each school is different depending on what needs they notice for their school, which is, I guess, why it's a local school governance team. They have their own challenges that they notice in the school, and they seek to address them. So some of them are looking specifically at tutoring and academic support. I know 2 of our schools recently have brought on tutors who are doing online tutoring with students. So each school is different. It's probably the best way I can answer it.
I see. Thank
Is there
you.
any way that support, that financial support, can come from more definitive funds rather than piecemeal, like our CARES funding?
I also understand there's donations from churches for outdoor tent type things. They're willing to give us if we don't have the money to spend.
I mean, it just seems like people shouldn't be having to look for this money. It should be just a request and done.
I don't think we have had requests that have been denied, or people, building leaders have not. If they have, they've gone to Mr. Gaskins, but Mr. Gaskins, you can speak to that, but I have not had requests that have come to me specifically around supporting the need for outdoor classrooms. To be exact, I have met with almost every faculty in the school district within the last 3 weeks. And one of the things I have stressed is not looking for conventional ways to meet the unconventional needs of our students. And that is not specifically tied just to COVID, but it's the needs of our students in general. And I have asked principals to meet with their faculties to identify what it is they need. And I have spoken about CARES funds and have said, let us know what you need. And so I've had that conversation with every faculty, every principal that I have been given an opportunity to speak with. And I have asked those principals to have that conversation with their teams and to let us know back what their needs are. Some of what I think Mr. Gaskins has may be COVID related. And then there have also been requests about outdoor learning spaces pre-COVID. So I don't know, but I do not want for us to suggest that we have said, well, the only way you can do it is if you can find the money to pay for it. What I have said is, tell us what you need, and we will do everything we can at a district level to make that work. And Mr. Gaskins, I don't know if you have had specific requests that have come to you, but I have not as yet received those requests.
I've had requests. They've been specifically towards the instruction in a remote learning environment. And so all of those requests have been honored. Byron knows that we've spent a lot of our CARES funding to add additional add-ons to our curriculum so individuals can teach from home. Those are the only requests that I've received, Dr. Thomas, but all of those have been honored. And again, when we have our principal meetings, as we did today, we encourage our principals, if there is something that you need or your teachers need, or that your parents suggest that would make the learning better, please let us know. And then, we'll share that with other principals, because if it's something that you need, another principal may not have thought of that. And we have usually, in the case of instruction, bought things district-wide that may have come out of a 5th grade team saying, we would love to have, or a 6th grade team saying, we would love to have Nearpod to teach our math lesson. And I was able to buy Nearpod for all of our middle schools once I brought that back to my math coordinator and middle school principals. So we have the money, and we have opened our doors to say, if there's something that you need, just tell us and we'll get it for you.
I have
That's
just
good news.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that's good news. I've never heard an administrator say we actually have the money. Okay, this is good. I'm sorry. I got excited.
So I think I'm going to keep trying to push back on this idea of this phased in reopening. I mean, I guess my concern here is that we're following CDC guidelines in some regards and then not following CDC studies and new recommendations that are rolling out in other regards. And so I'm worried about the lack of consistency with what we're seeing as evidence that return to school may be safe if we do it the right way. And so this phased in reopening kind of elongating the timeline for middle and high school students and stretching out the return for our younger students, I think is sort of going against what we're seeing as evidence that schools, if done safely, can actually be spots where there is no rampant spread. So it just really concerns me that, I don't know how to say this, but it just seems like we are listening to the science on one hand and then not listening to the science in the other. And I would have loved to have seen a phase-in plan that was more aggressive and that really did look at, A/B approaches where half of the students, for example, were in the buildings at any given time, but at least they were all going to school every week. So I don't know, I just kind of feeling like I got to keep pushing back on this.
I think too, though, that, the truth is all 9 of us have very different opinions based on our lived experiences, as parents, as some of us, teaching, many of us, still working. And I think that is where it sort of pushes up against, certainly we all have different perspectives on, on what the phase-in should look like. With 4 children, 3 at home, I have some pretty strong ideas about what it needs to look like. But I also know that we don't necessarily have all of those, always have all of the details as it relates to staffing. So Dr. Anderson, I definitely hear your concerns. The other part of that, though, is that there's a part of listening to science and, trying to engage in best practices. But then in addition to that, there's also the realities of the resources that we have, financial resources. And I specifically think about our transportation department, who often don't have the flexibility to either socially distance. And even if they do, they are still starting, their staffing. We've still had issues there, and a lot of our transportation staff, as well as our teaching staff, but with transportation, we have a lot of vulnerable populations. I don't want to jump in Dr. Thomas's space, but I did want to add, sort of a different perspective there, that there is a very delicate balance. I definitely think students need to be back in school, and trying to consider what do we know so far, but then also considering what do we have so far by way of resources, financial resources, as well as human resources. And transportation is, if I'm recalling, Mr. Schooneman may be able to correct me on this, but this is one of the areas that's not traditionally funded strongly anyway. So it's sort of like we're having to work with what we have, as well as consider what we know scientifically and balance the needs of the community as well. And I don't know that there's a perfect way to do that.
Yes, I agree. And honestly, Dr. Anderson, not even going against the science, it's the staffing. So, at one point I shared we had 40 plus bus drivers out. Or, now we can see and read where there are teachers maybe wanting to take leave and not come in and not do this. So then we have to say who's going to teach the children. And so that is my bigger concern. I agree that, the science tells us that schools actually are safer because our kids aren't out in the communities. And when done correctly with the appropriate mitigation, really is helping to limit the spread because they are somewhere contained during the day. And but we get them to school and we have to have someone to teach them there, and we have to be able to get them there. And so I think that's the part we're trying to balance, not at all in disagreement with you. And we've pushed today, believe it or not, we started out with a hybrid, more of a hybrid, and then we're like, okay, let's be more aggressive, and we can continue and will continue. If you knew how many iterations of this plan we've had in the last 48 hours, because we want to, these kids need to be in school. But we also need people to be able to teach them. And that's the rub for us right now. And again, being able to get them there. But our team is committed to this, and we, have been flexible. We'll continue to be flexible, but we also have to look at, what are our staffing options and what are we able to do, and are not particularly married to one answer. But we are, what I finally said today is, we've been going around and around and around in a circle. Let's stop and ask ourselves what's best for children. And the answer was, we need to get them back in school. Okay, well, what do we now have to do to make that happen? And we will continue to push ourselves in that regard. And, if we see that it's viable to make changes in any direction, then that is something we're committed to doing. I don't know if anyone on cabinet, if there's something I have omitted, not said. We are working with community groups. We're working with, Dr. Gannon, I've talked about, can we use the Athens Clarke County government? Can they help us? So we really are trying to think outside of the box so that we can find a way to get our kids served. Mr. Gaskins, Dr. Watley, Mr. Harris, Mr. Schooneman, have I left out anything?
I would just, to add to what you said, Dr. Thomas, I think there's always an opportunity to modify and accelerate. We just want to make sure that once we have students in the building, we're not pausing because we've accelerated too quickly. So I think there's always an opportunity to modify our plan. Of course, we would want to socialize that with our principals so they can socialize that with their staff and their families, which we try to be very thoughtful about. But I do echo what Dr. Thomas says. We have had a lot of different versions, and we want our kids to be back all 5 days. And the sooner we can do that and support that with our families and our teachers, we will do that.
And can I just clarify for a second? So for pre-K through 8th grade, when they come back, they're coming back 4 days, right? They're not doing a hybrid of some will come Monday, Tuesday, some will come Thursday, Friday. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thanks.
And Dr. Thomas, is there any, I guess, in our particular roles as board members, do you see any other way that we can either support or leverage or speak with any of our other like governing teams and institutions about further support?
Not at this particular moment. I know you and I have done some brainstorming together, and we will continue to do that. There are some possible needs that we have that we're trying to, Ms. Paula Farmer is trying really hard to be creative in how she's supporting students, because we need them to continue to be fed in this model. And, that addresses some of the staffing concerns. So you need buses to get kids to school, but we need buses to get kids food. And, that was one of the considerations was, okay, well, if everybody was at school, then we don't have that problem. We can use the buses for this. So those are things we are looking at and challenges that we are attempting to address. So I have my notes, Dr. Gann, and we are trying to be creative, but I will reach out to the board if need be.
So how are other counties managing to do this with the staff that they have on hand, given the high rates of infection in all of the surrounding counties, not just us? What are they doing that's magical that we can't seem to figure out a formula for? Like what, I'm trying to get a better understanding of what's different about us in our county, that our staff, that we don't have enough staff for this to happen.
if I can just jump in, because I get to outside of the role of the school board member, I get to see some of the different counties. And what I see is they have a lot of problems. They aren't maybe as publicized or as known as some of our problems, but they have a lot of problems with their instructional delivery, with the staff, with certain student populations. And so I can see why we can't, you know, incorporate all of those approaches. So I don't know if that helps some. They obviously have some things that they're doing, but just in different roles, I see a lot of problems with the in-person school, the in-person model being face-to-face now with our numbers being so high. I just don't think people are as aware of them.
I would thank you for that, Ms. Hull. I think we've been very responsive to our family needs. And so we've offered a virtual option for families that were not interested in coming back in person, which some of our neighboring districts have not. Some of our neighboring districts said, everyone come, you know, you all come back to school. And so when we offer a virtual option, it then, you need almost twice as many teachers, or a teacher and a half, because you have that 4th grade classroom where there are teachers that need to teach those virtual kids at home, and that teacher that is teaching face-to-face. And we've been able to accommodate that, but if one teacher needs to isolate, then it's like a house of cards where it becomes a large strain. And also to Ms. Hull's response, some of our neighboring districts have had issues that they're now asking us for advice. So for example, there was a district that did not require mask wearing, and now they're having so many issues with the spread that they want to know from us, how do you get people to wear masks? And we have told them that has always been an expectation as we mitigate the spread.
And also, Dr. Anderson, I think I was thinking while you asked that question, what makes us different? And I think really, to be perfectly honest, I think our cabinet is very honest and we're very true, and we are committed to keeping people safe, and we do follow science. So for example, when public health says, hey, your teachers need to wear face shields because the COVID virus has changed, we're gonna make that happen. And so we're not going to, for public's sake, just say numbers that aren't true or make it seem like we got things and we don't have it. You know, if our bus drivers can't do it, they can't do it, they're not there, we're gonna be honest and say that. And so, and I think that transparency is something that I think we value here. And, you know, any way that the board can support us, that's welcome, but we're gonna be committed to being honest and being truthful in our numbers and how we report those, and truthful about our strengths and also our challenges.
And one thing I think for us to remember is that, you know, it is very, very important to share any feedback that we have, even of our experiences, but the constant feedback that we receive, sharing that with Dr. Thomas and her team. And then also there's a balance there in understanding, you know, that is Dr. Thomas's work, and it's the cabinet's work. And so while I may not agree with every, you know, aspect of plan, 9 of us may not all agree, 10 of us may not all agree, that is our role. And that, you know, sometimes it, you know, it sort of doesn't feel too good, but, you know, I think one of the things that we can do is continue to share the feedback that we get in hopes, because all of us want the same thing, and that is students in the building as safely as possible, but also the adults that are working with them, so that we're not creating an atmosphere where we, from the very, very beginning, we're starting off from behind with the human resources that we have. And so, you know, it's a delicate balance. I definitely understand fully your perspective, Dr. Anderson. And I also understand, you know, in our roles as board members, part of, you know, the huge part of sort of what we give up is like saying, hey, you know, Dr. Thomas, you and your cabinet, you know, come up based on the resources you got, based on the problems, based on the feedback that we give you, come up with a solution. Certainly is not the only solution, but a solution. And that, you know, doesn't always feel like, you know, a problem has necessarily solved, or that it may, you know, fully overlap with what we may want as individuals.
And one area that we can get help in, and we will share more information, I know, is that Nurse Amy has been working, and UGA has been very, very responsive, but us working with them for testing sites for our families, to utilize spaces that they already have designated for that, so that we can get regular testing when they are people that present symptomatic, is something that we may need just additional help on. But I know we have a meeting coming up again with them, and Amy has been working closely with them. And that partnership will really help us to advance some of our safety measures that we're trying to put into place. Okay, that was my superintendent's report. I think next might be, is it the calendar next? No, it is, yes, academic calendar. So Mr. Gaskins, I hope you've had a moment to breathe, and I will turn it back over to you and Mr. Harris.
Mr. Harris, would you like for me to drive?
Okay. Yes, please. All right, well, good evening, everyone. Mr. Gaskins and I are here to present to you our academic calendar for the 2021 and 2022 school year. You can go to the next slide. Our objectives for today, we're gonna provide recommendations for the next 2 years academic calendar. We were able to convene a calendar committee, which was made up of a diverse group of stakeholders. We looked at LSGT members as well as teachers and administrators to ensure we were getting voices from different parts of the community. So we picked members from the elementary, middle schools, and high schools, from co-chairs to secretaries, just different positions. So that way we had just robust input on what our stakeholders wanted from our calendar. And one of the goals that is listed at the bottom, one of our main goals, was to increase our instructional days to combat some of the learning loss that our students have experienced during this pandemic. So the next slide will show you just some of our committee members, as mentioned, very diverse group from very different schools, different advocacy groups, from LSGTs to TAB. Like I said, myself, Mr. Gaskins, our central office. And we had a really great conversations around what were some of the needs and things that our parents and our teachers and stakeholders wanted to see from our calendar. We had a really robust discussion around changes to our calendar that has occurred over the past 2 to 3 years, changes that our community liked, changes that they wish we had not put into place. Some of the things that were mentioned that's on the next slide that they gave in their input was wanting us to ensure from our teachers that there were enough days during pre-planning that they could prepare for the school year without disruption. So they had enough days to actually plan for what they would be teaching. But they also wanted to make sure they had enough days on the back end during post-planning to actually do the final grading, make contacts with parents and families around whatever grades have been posted. And so we wanted to make sure we took that into an account. We had several parents on the committee, which I really, really appreciate the parent voice. Almost all of our parents basically said we need the kids in school as much as possible. Get us as close to 180 as you all can. If you all recall, our last several years calendars have been down to 176. And so our parents were really looking for us to get as close to 180 as possible to minimize those back-to-back breaks. So not having students, on a break and then 2 weeks later, they come back for 2 weeks and they go back on another break, but to be a little bit more consistent in the breaks that we present for our students. There's also this idea that conference days were a really good time for parents, for teachers to engage with parents, but the model by which we offer conferences, which Mr. Gaskins will talk about later, didn't necessarily have to remain the same, and that it would be helpful to combine those conference dates with a break, especially for those parents who plan their conferences early enough. And so we want to make sure that we honored that. And then this is Athens, so very much resounding that Georgia-Florida October 29th fall break should remain on the calendar. As you all know, we did do a survey with our staff the year before last, at this point, 2019, just asking about how important was it for our spring break to be aligned with the UGA calendar. And overwhelmingly, our majority of our staff reported that was not necessary and that they would prefer a later spring break in April because it was warmer weather. It was much more aligned with other family members and different reasons that they could travel in April instead of in March. And again, I say overwhelmingly the majority. That doesn't mean there weren't some who said they wanted it to align, but the majority did say that was not a factor and that they would prefer an April spring break. Our committee also agreed that that was the time by which they would prefer spring break. And then the last part was just our calendar committee saying we should always use the calendar committee. They appreciated the transparency. They appreciated the diversity of the group, the different perspectives. And so their input was that we should always have a calendar committee prior to bringing the calendar to the board. So we will look to honor that when we have another committee a year and a half from now to get the 2023-24 calendar.
And just as a point of clarification, as far as the spring break survey, we surveyed staff and we surveyed families. Is that correct, Mr. Harris?
Yes, thank you, sorry, staff and families.
So some of the highlights that we were able to achieve, which our calendar committee was very excited about, is that we were able to increase instructional days. In 2018-19, we had 176 days. Of course, this year we have 156 because it's not a normal year. We have increased it to 179 days in both the 2021-22 and 22-23 calendar. We're going to show you the highlights of the 2021-22, but the calendars are a mirror image of each other. In semester 1, we have 88 days. In semester 2, we have 91 days. That has increased the number of days in the semester for us. One of the reasons that we do have an unbalanced calendar is because we did not want to take second semester into January, because we are on a block schedule at our high schools and we take final exams, and we don't want students studying over the holiday break for their finals. We want them to be able to take those finals when that information is fresh in their head. And then we also consider that there are a lot of end of the year activities that actually take away from these 91 instructional days. So we feel like it will be as closely balanced as possible. We got a lot of good feedback from our calendar committee about having less disjointed student breaks. I think someone said, you look up and we're always out, and we agreed. I see Ms. Hull shaking her head. So we tried to address that the best that we could. Spring break is in April with time off for students and staff in March. We're the use of innovation to maximize instructional days. So there are things that Dr. Thomas says that we've learned from COVID that we will not abandon. And one of those is that the use of asynchronous learning days when appropriate. So instead of having conference days, we will have conference week. We know that a lot of our teachers have engaged families this past conference day through Zoom, and they were able to connect with parents by Zoom where parents were out of town on business trips. So we would replicate that, that practice by having a conference week. And one of those days would be an asynchronous learning day for students. So students could still work independently while our teachers are having conferences with their parents. We added an additional post-planning day for staff. This was a resounding big win as it relates to our teachers, because our students end one day and our teachers have literally one day to pack up their rooms, do report cards, and enjoy their summer. And that is especially hard for our high school leaders and teachers, because we're also trying to get those seniors across the stage for graduation. And then something internal that was important, that's why we have some internal people as well as principals, is to make sure that conference days are aligned to grading periods. So when you meet with a teacher, a student may be doing one way and then you get the report card and you're like, wait, I just met with you a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So we wanted that to align as much as possible. So as we look at our conference week, we have 2 conference weeks. One is October 4th through the 8th, and the other is March 7th through the 11th, and that is for our pre-K through 8th grade students only. In October, Monday and Tuesday are regular school days for students and teachers. We are encouraging teachers to plan virtual conferences during their planning time, before school, after school, whatever meets their needs and meets the needs of their families. On October 6th, which is the Wednesday, that is an asynchronous learning day for students. So teachers would potentially have the entire day to have a conference on that asynchronous day. On Thursday and Friday of that week, students would have a holiday. And then on the Friday of that week, teachers would have a work day, no students. We would imagine that most teachers, because our teachers are really efficient, will have all of their conferences done, and then they can prepare for the next quarter. So that would be the Friday of that week. In March, it follows the same pace and cadence. The asynchronous day on the Wednesday of that week, Thursday and Friday are off days for students. And then that Friday is a teacher work day for staff. As it relates to high school, our high schools will have a different conference week in the month of February. And the purpose of their conference week is for advisement. So they will have early release days on Wednesday. Wednesday and Thursday. On Monday and Tuesday, they will attend school as normal. On Wednesday and Thursday, those will be early release days. And then they will have an asynchronous learning day on that Friday, where they will work independently, and then teachers would have the entire day to finalize schedules for the upcoming school year. And so, Dr. Thomas, that is our presentation. I have a wondering, Mr. Harris, I don't know if we were able to add the actual calendar to the board doc, but if it's okay, we can actually show you the actual visual of what the calendar will look like. Okay.
And I think, Ms. Palmer, did you send it out?
It's in board docs.
It's in board docs. That's what I thought. Yeah.
Okay.
It's in board docs.
Okay. Thank you.
So, they'll pull it up if anyone wants to see it, but it is there.
Okay, I will pull it up and we can entertain any questions that you have.
Does anyone
So
have?
I have a question, but I don't know if my question needs to go here. So what about graduation this year?
We'll have that for you tomorrow. We met today,
Okay.
and we will be announcing the graduation of all 3 high schools tomorrow. And the other information that will be included is we have not finalized dates for prom, but we're working on finalizing the dates for prom. But we will have that information that will be shared with families tomorrow.
So they will get to have some kind of senior experience then.
That is our wish, our hope, our prayer that our that our high school seniors and high school students have a high school experience, but especially a graduation, in-person graduation.
Okay. And can we do something like extra special for them? Because they didn't get high school this year, and that was messed up.
Noted. Definitely noted. And I have a couple of people on my staff, Ms. Gallagher, as well as my superintendent, that have seniors that are graduating. So there's a little extra pressure to make sure that it's special for all of those employees' kids, as well as all of our kids.
So I told my child to actually send a letter to the board or email to the board with his concern, but he had a concern that even though they were out for MLK Day, they had a makeup day. They still had to work on it. And so he was He was very livid about that because he did not think that that was fair. So I guess my little nugget would be, if we're still in a situation where we're having to kind of make up days because the pandemic is making it crazy, just make sure that teachers are aware of what the policy is, because he felt that that was very inequitable, and he was in his feelings about it. He just didn't get that email out. But we just want to make sure that those important holidays that are designated as student time off so they can do other things are honored.
Yes, ma'am. And I would encourage him to still send that email to me as well as his principal, and we will we'll support him in that.
Thank you so much. A little civic activity. Thank you.
I have some clarifying questions really quickly as I'm looking at this. So what happens in 21-22 is the pre-K through 8 have a week in the fall and a week in the spring for parent-teacher conference.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the high school students only have the week off in the fall, but in the spring, it's just, that's not going to happen. Is that right?
So, and I can help maybe a little bit. So the spring, there is technically one day that's off, and that is that March 11th day. And if I'm correct, Mr. Gaskins, K-12 get that 11th off. Is that correct?
They would get, we as everything, there has been a lot of variation, so there may need to be some cleanup. They would get the 11th off as well. And I actually need to check Mr. Harris. I believe they would also get March 10th off. They would get the 10th, K-12 would get the 10th and the 11th off.
But the 10th is asynchronous.
The 9th is asynchronous. The 10th is the day off for all students, and the 11th is a day off for all students.
Okay, so that needs to be cleaned up. Okay.
Yes.
So the conferences for high school, Dr. Anderson, are just earlier because they have to do advisement for registration.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why they are not aligned and historically have not been aligned, because those high schools need more time because of determining classes and class offerings. So they have always had their second set of conferences earlier than K-8 because of it's not kind of the same, that all the same set courses. So it allows them to register for their upcoming year so that those course determinations can be made.
Okay.
But they still would get that day off, the 11th. And I thought we went back and said that the 9th. So anyway, whatever, there's an asynchronous day, they would have that. And then they would have the days off in March that everyone else is off, but their conference time would happen in February. I don't know if that clears that up any for you.
I know, but I will memorize this and make sure I have a better understanding of it, because I'm very confused about this. But my question, I guess, was if pre-K through 8 is getting a week off in the fall and a week off in the spring, and then the high schoolers are only getting the week off in the fall, but they're doing 1 or 2, does that change the number of days that they're all doing instruction?
I don't think, that's the part. Right. I think, go ahead, Mr. Gaskins.
I'm sorry. So I think the misconception is that that high school that they are receiving a week off in February. They are not. And that's why it's like 1,200 colors on here, Dr. Anderson. So I feel your pain as well. They are actually early release days on Wednesday and Thursday. So they will go to school and they'll get out early, which still counts as an instructional day for them. They will also have an asynchronous day on the 11th, which counts as a day for them.
Oh.
In March, our high school students will actually go to school on the 9th, which is an asynchronous day that counts for an instructional day for pre-K through 8. They will all be in school on the 9th. High school will be in person, pre-K through 8 will be virtual, and all students will be out on the 10th and the 11th.
I understand. Okay.
So their attendance days are still the same. It's just when they have their conferences has to be different because of registration for high school.
And why it's on my mind, Dr. Anderson, I think this is a great question because we did go over this. In our program of study, it doesn't include it yet. We'll wait for you all to approve the calendar, but we want to make sure that our high schoolers know what days they are supposed to be in school, because they also have finals, and finals are also early release days. We were trying, and we always have room for improvement, to try to make a calendar that did not have as much text and colors. And if we added all of our high school days, it would have really been out of control.
Is there a testing calendar?
The testing calendar has not come out yet. What happens is, are you talking about for next year, Ms. Gallagher?
Yes.
Okay, so the testing calendar has not come out yet. We wait for that from the state. And what they do is they give us a window, and then we look at our academic calendar and we try to fit our days within the window.
Okay, so we aren't signing up for any new standardized tests or anything for our students, correct?
No, ma'am. We don't sign up. They're required, but there's no new standardized tests coming our way.
Okay.
Have any discussions with your team been had about increasing the number of instructional days into summer for students who are really needing to catch up from having issues with virtual learning?
Yes, ma'am. We're having internal conversations around summer programming. Once we have finalized that, we will of course share that with the board and with families. We are looking to use June and July for that purpose. We want to get feedback, of course, and we want to make sure that our teachers have a break. So our best and brightest teachers are teaching our kids that have severe learning gaps. And so, yes, we're going to use our CARES money and some of the additional money we have in our budgets that we haven't used in other areas because we haven't been in school. But we are definitely planning. I don't want to call it remediation. I want to, because I think it's more strategic than remediation. It's really focusing on those skills that students are deficient in. But I also think there is an opportunity for enrichment as well. We have some students that have fallen out of love with school because they've been on Zoom. And so we also want to have or give autonomy to schools to create some innovation that engages those students in enrichment and provides a program that meets the academic needs that were fostered by learning loss.
I actually saw a couple of articles about that, and they're calling it acceleration academies for the summer. That do that described.
Well, that kind of leads into my question. Is there any possibility to partner with leisure services to kind of share standards, or to have some type of academic component to the summer camps that are being offered that could help students kind of re-engage in some of what they missed, or get them just prepped for the next school year?
Definitely. I met with Hope McGuire. She is our director of Title I and federal programs. So she is in charge of that. We just had a one-on-one this week. I can't remember what day it is, but this week I'm meeting with her at the beginning of next week so we can strategize what are our parameters. And then of course we will bring Mr. Harris in, as we always do, to engage our community so they can assist us in that. And Ms. Hull, I think you make a really powerful point. We want to make sure that we have the additional help, but I think we also have to be very specific about the standards and the skills that are deficient. So our kids that time that they are in any program is very meaningful, and that they start the school year better positioned than they were when they left.
And I made a note based on what Ms. Hull just shared, because, that's making a commitment, but that's something to explore also as we talk about being creative with our CARES funds. And is that a way that we can help to pay, you can pay student teachers, UGA students. There may be teachers who may not be having summer school, but they're willing to provide academic support in our camps. So that's where, again, I hate to keep saying it, but we have to be unconventional in how we're approaching these needs, and paying to have someone to go in, 1 hour, 2 hours or whatever a day into camps and other programs, who may be certified or working on certification, is a great use of CARES funds as well.
And just because this is my favorite thing to talk about, Ms. Hull, I'll just take another personal privilege. We've also talked about how we can utilize tutors for the entire school year and just not in the summer. So how can we hire UGA students or Piedmont students or whomever is working on an education degree or has a love for kids, and then actually deploy them to our community so they can be tutoring in our community centers, they can be tutoring at our local libraries. So students that are not in ASP or PSP, but they go home to their community center, to their playground, there's this, there's this teenager that kids love that can actually help them with their homework, because learning loss cannot be addressed in the 2 months that we have in the summer. It takes like 1.5 years to address learning loss. So we're really gonna have to depend on our community, especially people that are fresh at 5 o'clock and not people that have taught all day, to really engage our kids, that our kids are excited and energized to work with.
That's great.
I love that. I love that. And I know that just some of the community groups that I'm familiar with are looking at doing like book clubs over the summer. So there are lists that they can have so that our students can take that extra time to read a book that's more appropriate that they may encounter next year or they didn't really do well with this year. I just think there's so many ways that we can all work together and not keep reinventing the wheel, but be very supportive of each other. So I'm really happy to hear that y'all are exploring some of those options.
Yes, ma'am.
I got one really quick, and it kind of goes with what you were saying, Mr. Gaskins. But I got a question. So for next year, are we reinvesting? Something that in my head, I hope that we can do at some point, reinvest in reading interventionists and just the support, the additional support that's in the school that can do the pull-out groups and really get the kids, and not for testing, but because we got a whole year of nothing. But making sure that they're caught up. And I know, like, we can say we're gonna get people from the UGA, but really, but we're gonna have to we can pay retired teachers to come in and be reading interventionists. We can reinvest in the resources that we currently have, and we have tons of models that have worked in the past. It's just that I think as a community, and I'm just gonna say for Athens, what we do is we pay into something and then it works, and then we pull out of it as soon as we see the benefits, like, oh, it's working now, so we don't have to pay into it anymore. And I think reading interventionists is one of those things. So I'd like to see us, reinvest in the areas that we know we have gaps, but now we know that we're going to have an even greater gap in them because they have not had the in-person support.
That's noted, Ms. Gallagher. And I will say, under Dr. Thomas's leadership, any partnership that we have really stressed alignment to our strategic plan. In our strategic plan, it spells out a clear literacy goal. Mr. Harris and I are working as we engage community groups and nonprofits that wish to work with our kids. They have to understand first what our strategic plan requires and how their work will impact our strategic plan. So we're very focused in adding value to our kids and everything we do, and just not having people, sit with our kids and maybe collect money or maybe collect, I'm working with Clark County kids, but really, our expectation is that there is an impact because the gap is serious. And I know that we all know this, but it takes 2 or more years of solid teaching to close a gap. And we have students that have 3 or more years of instructional gaps before COVID. And so COVID has just exacerbated that. So your comment is noted, and we will make sure that we do that.
Mr. Gaskins, I was going to say, I do want to highlight what Ms. Gallagher and you mentioned, that it's really good, and Ms. Hull, it's really good to hear like those innovative ways. You mentioned something about having people in our neighborhood or community centers. And I just want to really applaud you for that, and the team for that, because a lot of students want services, but not all of them, but a lot of our like apartment complexes and things like that have community centers, oftentimes that may go unused during certain hours. And so the more that we can get services in communities, I feel like that really builds an opportunity for families and students in our communities to build a relationship, and sometimes even sometimes build trust, right? Sometimes there is such a disconnect, not because students are capable, but because there's this trust and the relationships and things like that. So I do want to highlight, I love the idea of having things in our neighborhood where many of our families may not be able to get in on time with leisure services. Sometimes you may not be able to afford it, or you may not have transportation, or you may not have a job that allows you to get your child to a camp at a certain time. So really, really good to hear that is continuing, that you all are continuing to look at ways we can leverage, our relationships in our community.
I have a couple of questions about the calendar. So one is, first of all, I really am glad that there was a calendar committee and that there was input from a lot of different people, from parents and teachers and all levels. I guess I have a lot of questions, but my 2 major questions are, was there a discussion about why we go back so early in August? And is it a possibility not to go back that early, or did people not care about that? And then my other question is, the winter break on this calendar is 21 days long. And I wondered why that is, and if there's any possibility of having less winter break and more summer break, and not just because I prefer summer to winter, but I think that it also affects people in terms of things that they do in the summer, not just vacations, but jobs and internships and opportunities. The fact that we go, and it's not just our district, but it's kind of more of the South in general, go back so early, it makes it so that a lot of students don't have the opportunities that some other students have for participating in programs in the summer.
We did not receive any feedback on our start date. Dr. Dykeman, that is, and Mr. Harris, I will defer to you. I can't remember anyone that was disappointed in our start date. I think people appreciated the week of Thanksgiving and then the long Christmas break. Not that we couldn't make that note in the future. I just don't remember anyone making a comment about our start date. Mr. Harris?
No, you're right. And I think Dr. Diamond kind of alluded to it. It's kind of commonality, or it seems to be in that space that us and our surrounding counties tend to start around that first week of August as we get pushed back earlier, but nobody on the committee made any note of it.
And the winter break, and right, so it's not really off from any other year, but the winter break kind of is, because they're off starting December 16th, and then they don't come back until January 6th. So there's like some days that there's like a half week, and then there's 2 full weeks off, and then there's another half week off in January.
That is correct. And I think what we had to do, because the feedback was about the disjointed days off. So some of the days that were added to the Christmas holiday, those days were like in October or in September. So it was like, as we mentioned before, students were off kind of more frequently. And the committee gave us feedback that they would prefer longer breaks versus the disjointed breaks. So that's where they landed. And then I will say that, you know, teachers have to have 190 days and it is really, really difficult to figure out where 190 days live. And so that's where we put it.
And so if people have, so we'll vote on this next week, right? So if there's feedback, I mean, imagine this is the first time that we've seen it. This will be the first time that other members of the public see the calendar. So imagine that there might be feedback between now and next week.
That's correct. So they can, you know, if they reach out to you, if something's shared with us, you know, some of the areas we're more locked into, but you know, and we've looked at the calendar, I don't know how many times, and I didn't notice that there were 21 days off. And so I'm like, oh, really? But you know, that's something, you know, if we get feedback, you all are welcome to email me directly, and then I will share that with Mr. Harris and Mr. Gaskins, and we can look if there are any areas that we overlooked before and see what we need to change.
So I'll be the bad word. Have we thought about year-round schooling to help with some of this catching up on these gaps?
No, we have, well, I'm sure we've thought about it in our minds, but not in terms of planning a calendar. No, we have thought about everything in our minds. We've thought about, I've even said we're going to residence hall and on-campus living. So there is not much we haven't thought about, but not in the way of an official plan. No, ma'am. I'm looking for dorm moms and dorm dads right now. So
I think that's I like that. I hadn't even thought about residence hall. That's even year round.
I have.
That would be good. But I'm thinking about the academy, and I think it's in what is it? The county. I forget that. Anyway, my niece went to one of those, and it was a year-round school, and they did pretty well. But it was a high school, so yeah, totally different.
We did something called 45-15 when I was a kid. You were on for 45 days and then you had 2 weeks off. It was nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of our surrounding counties did that. They started calling it, I think, Dr. Yeager, like intercession weeks or something. And I think Greene County did it, and some other surrounding counties a few years back that have kind of become really popular, where they were doing, take that 2 weeks and then come right back. And I would not be surprised if schools don't start returning to a model like that just in response to COVID.
Right.
I can definitely research that in my department. The research is split on year-round school because it does require that the conditions are right, and the conditions can be defined in many different ways. But I think that is something worth researching, and then I can share with Dr. Thomas what we think about, you know, based on our schools, if it would be a good fit.
Thank you. And it doesn't have to be everybody, but I know that, gosh, I want to say it wasn't Fayette County, it's outside of Atlanta, but they definitely had, they still have it. It's a Scholars Academy or something. I can't remember the name of it. But yeah, it worked well for them.
All right. So, Mr. Gaskins, with your with the academic calendars, is that all for your report?
Can I ask one more question before we move on from the academic calendar?
Sure.
Will some of the plans for the sort of summer, whatever this idealization that we're seeing of how the summer is going to possibly play out for, you know, whether it's remediation or if we call it acceleration, is there a timeline for when that will be communicated? And could it be as close to now, since the calendars also come out, as possible? Because it makes the sell for the calendar and all of these other things that are happening a lot easier if parents know that they have these summer options coming up, and they can probably start planning sooner rather than later for all of these events that are now going to just start spilling out, probably starting around March into 22.
That is our desire. We are moving very quickly. My team is working on summer school. We're also working on reopening. We're also working on a lot of different things. So we are trying to get it out as soon as possible. We have designated what we think would be the dates for the enrichment and summer program. But I think that once we can finalize that, we will. I'm actually doing a convening of my team, I believe, on Monday afternoon to finalize some things. We've already selected a committee of staff members to give us some ideas and some feedback. So once we have some finalized plans, we will share those. Our desire is if we can share those as close to our conference day as possible, so we can share those with parents when they have conferences.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
So I'm an optimist, I really am, but I also just spent an hour on the phone with the National Science Foundation yesterday planning a research cruise for January of 2022, where we spent over an hour working out the logistics for what happens if COVID is still around. I know it's not really something we want to think about, but we are all being very optimistic that we're going to be able to carry on as usual very soon. And I just wonder, have we got contingencies for what happens if we are still dealing with COVID?
I honestly don't think COVID is going anywhere with the variations that keep popping up. And so in my thinking, the things that we're putting out here are probably contingent on this being the new norm. I don't know. So I'm sorry, that's my 2 cents worth. So.
And one of the things I encouraged us to do, even when we were looking at the calendar and parent-teacher conferences, that's why we went back and put asynchronous days, is that, we can't abandon the things we've learned during this period. But I don't know, Dr. Yeager, in terms of contingency plans for anything specific, or are you thinking more in general?
I just think we've all hoping this will just go away and we can get back to normal. And I think yesterday's conversation with the Science Foundation just kind of knocked me back into reality, which is we may still be dealing with this,
Right.
especially the kids, because they're not yet even giving vaccines to kids under 16 because they don't even know if they're safe, so as a institution that works with 0 to 16 kids, we have to think about the possibility that they're not going to be able to be vaccinated. And yes, maybe the teachers will be, but the kids may not be. And how do we deal with that? Sorry to be a downer, but
I think one thing that has come to our attention, and Dr. Thomas has tasked me with really building out a real online school. Not that all of our students would be interested in online school, but we currently use GAVs and other online courses. But really, how do we have a online school taught by Clark County teachers that is a good option for students? That teacher is the master of online learning, and they can replicate, as they can just replicate a really rigorous environment. So that is something that I'm working on with a member of my team in the background as an online school as one option as we move forward. But I definitely have noted your question, Dr. Yeager. Now my head is kind of spinning with ideas, but I think that we have to be ready for that.
Great. I knew you would be, but thanks for saying it.
And that's part of why we've talked about putting tutors in our communities as well. When we first started talking about it, it was even like for times like now. So having those resources where we can send tutors to community centers to support our kids is also something that we'll be able to continue if needed when we, have other rounds of this unfortunate pandemic and in different versions of that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Thomas and Mr. Gaskins and everyone that provided feedback. We'll move forward with item number 8, which is our financial report. And 8.1 is our December 2020 financial report. Dr. Thomas and Mr. Schooneman.
Yes, ma'am. I will turn it over to Mr. Schooneman at this time to present our financial.
Thank you. Good evening, Dr. Gant and members of the board. I'd like to just start off saying that I have really appreciated tonight's dialogue. I think it's really kind of pushed our thinking internally, as you can see with Brandon's Brandon's wheels starting to spin after the last recommendation. I just feel like we are truly all better together with everyone's different viewpoints that they're bringing to the table tonight, and just like to say that I really appreciate the different viewpoints being shared. With all the challenges that we have and the big decisions that we have to make, one of the very positive things that we have going for us are our financials. We are in a really strong position financially, and I can just say that is a very fortunate position to be in as we're trying to tackle some of these really challenging questions and how to be creative and get our kids back face to face. How do we do this? All I can say is we are in a good place financially, and that's a very fortunate position to be in. So, Ms. Davis, your ears should be perking up.
Yes.
Smile on your face. I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at this financial report, but all of the comments here are in green.
I saw that.
So right now, our cash and fund balance, it's tracking well above where we were at in FY20. And that's due to a couple factors. Just remember, we ended last year on a strong note. We added $4.5 million in cash to our bank account. This year, we have not only savings, but strong revenue collections. And so if you look at both our cash and fund balance in our general fund, they're $6 and $7 million above where we're at this point last year. So we did project ourselves, or we did have a FY22 budget that was anticipating more expenditures and revenues. So we really expected at the beginning of the year this yellow line for both cash and fund balance to go below the blue line here. And so just the trends that we're seeing is just the opposite. Like I said, we do have some savings and strong revenue collection, which has put us in this strong position kind of going into the budget season for next year. Our revenues, we have two main sources. We've got local property taxes and then state QBE. So those are our two main sources. For our property taxes, we are right on track to collect 100% of what was budgeted for the fiscal year. We're sitting at 94.6% of what was budgeted. And last year, at this time, we were sitting at 94.7%. And we collected 100% of our tax revenues last year. So it's looking like we're right on target to collect all of our property taxes. On the other side of things, we were slightly concerned in the past couple of months about not collecting all of our state QBE money. There has been a few things that have transpired over the past month to 2 months. One of those is, I think I've shared this with the board, but this is the state of Georgia, the Department of Revenue. Each month they put out their own statement of revenues, and the one figure that you got to look at is 6.1%. So that 6.1%, what that's saying is, compared to last year, the revenues at the state level are up over 6%. So the state is actually in a pretty good financial position going into the second half of this fiscal year. And so what's happened is our governor has taken a look at the second half of our fiscal year, and he's actually put out an amendment to the FY21 budget. So he's actually proposed an amendment. The line item specifically that I'm talking about on our revenue is this QBE allotment reduction. And for those of you that have been around for the budget season last year, probably recall that we had about $7.3 million of austerity from the state. This is where it lies on our statement of revenue. So with the state's strong collection of revenues, the governor's gone back in and addressed this one line item and said, hey, we really need to give some of this money back to schools. And so in his proposed budget, which is linked right here on page 13, you can go in and see the proposal. And for K-12 public schools, he's proposing to give back $567 million. So restoring almost 60% of that austerity that they initially gave to school systems. And so what that means for Clark County is that we're going to get, if it passes, I got another email today that just kind of summarizes the activity at the level. The legislature basically turned around with their own budget, which strongly mirrors exactly what the government put out. And it's highly likely that we will get about $4 million of unbudgeted funding from the state.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we are likely going to receive about $4 million more in QBE funds than we had budgeted at the beginning of the year. So if we look at our revenue statement, without that $4 million, we are still looking pretty good. I did mention our property tax collection. We're at 96%, and that's right on track to receive all of those property taxes. And then our QBE earnings, we had a little question up until this month, and now we think we might get $4 million more. So we're doing well there. Overall, we received 68.6% of our budgeted revenue, and we're actually ahead of where we were at this time last year. So overall, just how it percentage-wise, how it stacks up, what we receive from the state accounts for 21% of our overall revenues that we've collected. This will actually grow to about 40% by the time the fiscal year is done.
That's great.
About 79%, and that's just due to the timing of when we collect our property taxes.
So Byron, then does that mean that when we're looking at a reduction in our fund balance of about $4 million for the end of this fiscal year?
Ms. Davis, we'll get to that in this cash flow projection. So that's the last thing that I'll cover.
Right. Yeah, thank you. I'll wait.
Okay. So next, just going to touch briefly on our expenditures. Those are controlled by our budget. And just overall, we are definitely on track to spend less than our overall FY20 budget. So we can just leave it there. Looking at our expenses, they're right in line with where we were at this point last year. And just the way that the year is shaping up, definitely going to spend under what was budgeted for the fiscal year. When we look at how the remaining portion of the year may go, we're going to turn to that cash flow projection. And as of the end of December, so exactly 6 months or halfway through the fiscal year, although we had budgeted ourselves in the hole about $5.5 million, and that's what Ms. Davis was just talking about, we're now looking at a deficit of about $2.9 million, and this does not account for that additional $4 million that we may get from QBE.
Wow.
So looking at that cash flow projection, what's in orange here, this is all actual revenues, and this is all actual expenditures. And so down here in our graph, the blue line is what our budget is. So we're actually budgeting, like I said, our bank account shrinking by almost $5.5 million. The way that it's shaping up and what we anticipate is that it's going to be closer to $2.9 million. And that's without that additional $4 million from the state. So if we do end up getting that $4 million from the state, you can see that this trend line is going closer to zero. And if we add $4 million to that, it's likely, very likely, that at the end of this fiscal year, we will also add funds back into our fund balance. So going into budgeting for next fiscal year, pretty strong position. You know, we added funds at the end of last year, and in FY19, we also added about $800,000. And so if we add funds again this year, our overall, I can get over here. When we're looking at our threshold of $25.3 million, we will be several $1 million over that minimum threshold that we want. So it's just a very safe place to be.
It is.
So in combination of that additional $4 million from QBE and the amount of money that we're getting through CARES, all I can say is that we're in a strong position financially to support some of these creative ideas to solve some of these challenging, complex issues.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, two questions. My first one is, do you have like a class on understanding all of these different categories? And my second question is, on this screen where it says expense percentage paid prior year to current year, what, like, we aren't in school, what are we buying?
One of the main things to keep in mind, 85 to 90% of our budget is made up with personnel, salaries, and benefits. And so though we're not face-to-face doing instruction, still working, we're still paying salaries and benefits. So the vast majority of our budget, which is spent on salaries and benefits, we are still spending.
So subs and bus drivers and custodians and all of the people who would have got paid for being in school who are not currently in school and getting paid are still getting paid?
I guess the caveat with what you just said, as long as they are our employees. So right now the substitutes are not our employees.
Okay.
And, we had elected to last year pay them their average rate through that substitute staffing company that we went through.
Okay.
Here, we're compensating them for the actual time that's worked, and then also giving a small bonus for, I guess, the number of days that they work in a specific period. If they work more than that threshold, we are giving them a small bonus as well. But for, by and large, for all of our employees at CCSD that earn a salary and are full-time, they are getting paid.
So we spend the same amount of money in school or out?
For salaries and benefits. Now, there are other areas of savings, contracted services, electricity, other utilities. There is savings in the budget, and that's what we saw last year when the year ended up. And that's why we were able to add about $4.5 million to our bank account, is because we did see a lot of savings in other areas, not necessarily salaries and benefits, but some of those other operational types of expenditures. We did see significant amounts of savings.
Okay, so do you have a class? Because I got like a lot of more questions.
I will be happy if you ever want to set a time. It goes for anybody on this call. You know, we can sit down and have a question and answer training session. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
And when you schedule that, Karina, please invite me because I love learning.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I'm sure that and it's not a budget, but it is about funding. I'm sure everybody on the board probably has received a copy of an email or an article, but there's some, can you help me understand whether or not enrollment numbers can significantly affect our Title I funds or our school funding? Because there's talk out there that if students unenroll in the county, that will affect the funding, I guess, that we receive. And you seem like the most appropriate person to ask and to clarify, shed some light on it.
So our funding, which makes up about between 40 and 45% of our overall budget, that is a direct, it's directly tied to those FTE counts. So you are, the district earns funding per FTE. And as we see a decline, if the parents pull their students out of school, there is, you know, as we see a reduction in FTE counts, our funding is impacted
Negatively.
as a, well, I'm trying to think of the word, as a prorate, not a proration, but a percentage of that amount that goes down. So for instance, if you look at the last FTE count, which was in October of 2020, and compare that to the October of 2019 count, the overall FTE counts are down roughly 4% across the board. We saw a more significant decrease in the kindergarten through fifth environment, and at the high school and middle school level, it stayed pretty consistent, pretty steady. But that decrease definitely does impact our QBE funding, you know, very much so.
Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. Mr. Schooneman, does that conclude your report?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. We will move forward. Just to be sure I didn't see a hand. We'll move forward with item number 9. And these are our policies to be posted for public comment for 4 weeks. So they're items 9.1 through 9.9. Dr. Yeager, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gant. So we have a pretty small list today. We're kind of cleaning up the last of a few sections. We've got a few K policies and a few J policies. The K policies were worked through with, I believe, Ms. Gallagher and Mr. Harris, and they brought the policies forward, and then Mr. Pruitt looked at them. So there were some legal comments following the recommendation from the small group that we've responded to in policy at our last meeting. And so I sent you all an email with some of those explanations, but I'll just work through them right now, if I may. So first of all, KA, which is our public relations goal statement. It's actually a really nice statement. We left it alone. It's a review only. It talks about using a variety of media to communicate. It talks about including channels for feedback, which of course we desperately need, and fostering partnerships. So we really like this policy and left it alone completely, and there were no legal implications of the policy. So we thought we'd keep it in place. So it's a review only. It was originally, or last reviewed in 2015, so it's not very old either. The next one is KG, which is the use of school facilities. It was last reviewed in 2013. We recommended a minor revision. to allow Dr. Thomas to delegate decisions about the use of school facilities to others, namely principals, to make sure that she wasn't the one having to decide about all of the different school facility uses. And that's the only revision we had for KGR1. There was some comments about the price structures of the school facilities. And I understand that this was reviewed and approved, or by the team. Then there was there's some exhibits as well, and the exhibits might need to be updated, but that's not really the board's providence, so we didn't go there. The only other question that I've had in the week since our policy meeting was from Mr. Davis, and I think it's a good question, and I think I have a good answer for him, which was, do we charge groups that want to come in the school and say help with literacy? So if they're not the PTO or the LSGT, maybe it's a church group or maybe it's a community group, do they qualify under the no charge? And so we looked into the policy a little bit, and it does talk about what's the wording? Hang on, let me find the wording. Sorry, school associated or school support or something like that. And I think, Mr. Harris, maybe you want to chime in here, but I think we agreed that that clause included things like community school usage and others. So most of the folks we want in the schools to help our kids would get free access. It's only the unrelated activities that want to say use the auditorium or use the cafeteria for something unrelated to schools that would be charged the modest fees that we charge. And usually that's just to account for the extra janitorial services or some of the cleanup from those. So the costs are pretty modest, but we agreed that those community school activities would probably be free of charge. So we didn't think we needed to modify this policy. Any questions about that?
Just a testimony, we did have this discussion back in 2013, and I think the driver then was if the service was being provided to the students of our schools. I think you're calling it community schools, but if it was strictly to the students in the school, then there was no charge. So you could be a community group, and if you weren't doing something for the benefit of the students, you were subject to that charge. So that's what I recall.
Yeah, and I think that's consistent with what I saw too.
Okay.
And we didn't mess with that. Okay, moving on then. KM was visitors to schools, and the original review thought it was fine. Mr. Pruitt commented on the legal aspects, that there's some new state laws encouraging us to make it even easier for good parent-teacher communication. So we added a sentence at the beginning to emphasize that piece of the state law. Mr. Pruitt, did you want to comment on that?
No, not necessarily. I was just pointing out that you already had a policy that is consistent with, it's actually the federal law. It's the Every Student Succeeds Act that, so yeah. So you just added that language. It sort of highlights how our policy fits with that law.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Any questions or discussion? Moving forward, the JGC policy, which was last revised in 2002, was kind of old. And this is Dr. Watley working with, Dr. Watley, remind me which board member, was it working with Dr. Maddox?
No, Attorney Hall and Dr. Maddox.
Dr. Maddox, thank you. So she recommended some changes, mostly to clear up, hang on, let me pull it forward. We're on JGC, the Student Health Services. Yeah, so there was that middle paragraph, which seemed kind of odd and didn't really say, I mean, obviously the superintendent shall be responsible for developing other regulations, and it really didn't seem to be needed, especially since there was no regulation associated with this policy. So we discussed this in policy committee and recommended deleting that middle paragraph, but leaving the rest of it alone. Does that concur with what you were thinking, Dr. Watley?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions about that one? Moving forward to JGCB, student immunizations. We had quite a discussion about this one. Of course, it's very relevant to the present situation. Mostly Dr. Watley and Mr. Pruitt worked on this one to include more aspects of the law, primarily that there's a way to not be required to have immunizations through the certified recommendation of a licensed physician or a local board of health. And there's also religious exemptions, of course, but that those religious exemptions can be suspended during times of pandemic. Not that they are right now, but that they could be. So we included those aspects of the law, which we thought were relevant, particularly to any parents reading this policy. Any questions about that one? Or comments? There's my cat, has a comment. All right, if there is none, moving forward, JGCB. Oh no, that's the one we just did, sorry. JGCD is a medication policy, which was also revised according to legal advice. There was a statement about if that students' privileges for self-administering medications could be removed, and that's actually not true at all. We cannot prevent a student from giving themselves the medication that they require. And so we changed some of the language to be more in line. This was a 2015 policy, but it seemed to be a little bit out of date. So we tried to fix it by deleting some of the paragraphs. Mr. Pruitt, did you want to say anything more about that one?
Not really. That was perfect.
Okay, awesome. And then, whoops, yes, and then the reg is just a review only. It was fine. Finally, 9.9 policy LDAJA. I know Dr. Watley worked a long time on this one, and we thought about it quite a bit in policy. We were very concerned about the original writing and how different interrogations and investigations of kids in schools could happen. We were really pleased that Attorney Hull came to the policy meeting where we would discuss this, and she also gave us some insights. So thank you for that. What we've done is focus this policy entirely on interrogations by law enforcement and no one else. So this policy just allows the school to sort of protect the student where needed, have adults in the room, require various conditions for any student that's being interrogated by law enforcement. And I think it's a much better policy now that we've done that. Anybody else want to comment?
In the discussions, I thought there was a concern about like agencies of the state having access to students. Where is that covered if it's not going to be covered here? Like DFACs or people like that coming in doing their investigations. I remember that conversation from the earlier discussions on this one.
Right. If I could jump in. Yeah, Ms. Davis. So that was the way that was solved. I was targeting it only at law enforcement. So if a social worker or, anyone investigating a child abuse situation, that was my concern, is that it might be interpreted to keep child abuse investigators out. So it's been modified to only apply to law enforcement, not to social workers and child abuse related personnel.
So I guess, okay.
Yeah, are students then therefore subjected to being interrogated by social workers, by DFACs or any other advocacy group that may show up without notification of parents?
Well, there's something. So there's a federal law. The acronym is CAPTA, Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. And so actually we are supposed to cooperate. I mean, if there's a child abuse situation and a social worker from DFACs needs to interview that child and not inform the parent for fear of retribution, we need to cooperate with that, and we're actually required to by CAPTA.
Wow.
So I'll just jump in. if allowed, but we had discussion with that, and I'm blanking on her name, but Crystal, what's
Yeah,
Crystal's name?
Crystal Gillis, yes. Mhm.
So Ms. Gillis, from what I understand, she actually has a background in DeFi, so she gave a lot of insight about the investigations, and there was a lot of talk about making sure that if a social worker is interviewing a child and we're having to follow that, there could be some safety precautions taken so that, you know, an administrator can be in earshot outside of the door to make sure that it's handled correctly and allowing those interviews to happen, but protecting our children from the abuse of, well, not the abuse, but the experience of having to go through, say, a forensic interview or a psychosexual or something that could technically happen at school, but shouldn't be happening at school. So there was a lot of good conversation around what are we required to do, what can we protect the students from, and Dr. Watley and Ms. Gillis even went further to say, okay, now we're going to start to have to build out these procedures to align with the policies to make sure that everybody's on board. So I really appreciated that discussion.
And then also, just for clarity's sake, the social workers, they're not really interrogating, they're more or less interviewing. And so I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that, you know, it is not an interrogation at a social worker, that it's more like, you know, kind of to your point, Attorney Hull, they'll be, you know, interviewing these students really in sensitive situations. And we want to make sure that we protect that and for the children to feel safe.
That's my concern, is that, again, if I am I can't imagine my children being interviewed by someone, regardless of who they are, about their situations at home, when we have rules at home too, and them not experiencing some trauma around that. And so my concern here, again, especially in an abuse situation, the children are already hypersensitive. So having one in earshot is one thing, but I'm just a little bit concerned that maybe I just want to know more about process, and it's outside of my purview, but I want parents to feel safe, and I want the child to feel safe, and I want trauma created by that situation to be addressed before we send that child home.
Absolutely. And I think it's something that we're going to have to flush out in a procedure. This is the policy, but Ms. Gillis and I are going to be working to, for example, you know, we can say the person can be in earshot, but we also know that in real life situations, sometimes a new person coming in can be re-traumatizing to a student. And so what does that look like in a procedure? And we'll have to just kind of over time, like, work to flush that out so that kids feel safe. And not every situation is the same. So for some kids, it may be that, for example, the counselor has to talk to them before they meet with the interviewer. So let them know that they're going to be outside the door. But we also want to value that interviewer's interview with the student. We don't want to be intrusive inside of there, because we are talking about serious situations such as abuse and things of that nature. So again, we're going to flush that out in a procedure, Ms. Davis, because to your point, we just want to make sure that the kids are safe and that that it gets rectified in that situation and they're not returning back to an unsafe situation.
Mr. Harris just pointed out in the chat that there is a policy regulation, JGI-R1, that's specifically about child abuse and neglect, and it has a lot more detail about what Ms. Davis is asking.
And Ms. Davis, just add some more context to it. I know that Dr. Watley is looking to meet with the juvenile court judges to kind of help flesh out what these procedures will look like. So ideally, in the stakeholders meetings, we'll have our school component, our juvenile court component, and then our DFACS component all working together, having the same conversation so they can have the same knowledge and know what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, and what the expectations are.
Absolutely.
I'm feeling a little bit better, just a little bit better. Little bit. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yes, and we do have some fleshing out to do. And I'll look at that. I thought I had seen this before, so I'll definitely look at the J policy to see if that allays my fears.
Yeah, it's JGI and its regulation. And thank you, Mr. Harris, for pointing that out.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And just a reminder, the J's are coming up. No, the I's are coming up next. Sorry, the I's are next and then the J's. So we will try to get through all of these before the next couple months get finished. I think that's the end of the policies. If anybody has any additional questions before next week, I'm happy to address them over email.
Okay, so I'm distressed that this list is so short. I want you to know that, Tish. But thank you.
Well, we're trying to accommodate our precious staff time and not push them too hard.
But I did. I was able to, yeah, I did this in an afternoon. This is awesome.
David, just be ready next month. We got a whole list coming your way.
That's right. We got a big pile coming.
You're not allowed to do that to me. I had a birthday.
Save your energy.
All right, Dr. Yeager, does that conclude your reviewing of our policies? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move forward with item number 10, which is personnel. Item 10.1 is our February 2021 personnel report. And then item 10.2 is the February 2021 contract list. Dr. Thomas, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. And then if there are any questions by anyone, if you would take the time to ask those questions now.
Yes, ma'am. So it would be my recommendation that the personnel report as presented will be accepted and voted on for next week. And the contract list, I apologize, I've been trying to, it is not loading, but it's my understanding that that is the list of individuals being brought before the board for contracts for the 21-22 school year. And we will make sure that you're able to access that. I apologize.
It's just long. It'll take a minute, but it'll load.
Yeah, it was long, and then it started telling me that it wasn't loading. But yes, it is our full contract list for the 21-22 school year.
Did everyone refresh so that they have the right document under the personnel, under 10.1? I had the wrong document was there earlier, but I fixed it. So I just want to make sure everyone has the correct document.
I'll go back and do that. Thank you.
Are there any questions or discussion for Dr. Thomas?
So this is February, right? So these are the contracts for next year. Is that what this list is?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I thought so. I just wanted to confirm that. Do we have more or less?
Miss Linda, I wish I could tell you, but
It's okay.
HR person, I'm trying to keep up with so much, and
no worries, no worries.
I'm so sorry. Without Miss Duke here tonight, she would be able to really give that to you within a matter of seconds. But I can find that out and let you know.
Oh, no worries. Don't spend time on that. But do tell her that I miss her.
Yeah, teachers actually aren't required to make their contract decisions until much later in the year. So we're doing this a lot earlier than we used to go ahead and get you get the bulk of it. You can do early. So that's what you're seeing.
And it allows principals the opportunity, if teachers notify us that they're not returning, principals have asked consistently to have more advanced time to post and hire in order to find strong candidates.
Okay, great. Okay, now I can see the personnel list. I'm sorry, I didn't see that earlier.
All right.
Can I ask about process in,
Yes,
these meetings? So for the personnel approvals or this document with, a lot of people in it, for the new members, is it just our job to check off on it, or is there a more robust conversation that happens at some point about what this means in the broader picture? How does that work?
So
Go ahead, Dr. Gant.
Well, I was just saying more so from a board perspective, and then maybe Dr. Thomas can speak to you from a superintendent perspective. So yeah, typically if there are like more general questions about the personnel list, like very general, then those can be asked at this time. If there's like, oh, it's like 100 people on here, or is this increasing, like generally about contracts? But I think it's probably best practice if there are individual questions, particularly about specific people, to ask those directly to Dr. Thomas. Also, however, it is a fine line because we are sort of approving this recommendation. Now, if there are glaring like issues with someone that that maybe someone may have missed that have to do with like harm or what have you, then of course that's the question that a conversation you want to have with Dr. Thomas. But in general, because we don't hire these individuals and it's the superintendent that does, the robust conversation really sort of stops there. And so it's not necessary, it doesn't go into like who I think would be the perfect person in this position, or why is this person. So it's more so questions related, let's just say, to strategic planning or our strategic goals. If we see like, transportation and nutrition, those are some of the areas I'd like to keep an eye on. If it's something with retention there, those are the types of questions that generally would be appropriate for board members.
And when it's,
And if I can jump in and just sort of give the legal background on that. So there's a state statute that does require the board to approve the personnel list, but then you also have the state mandated local board member code of ethics, one of which bullet item says that you should not undermine the authority of the local superintendent or intrude into responsibilities that properly belong to the superintendent, including such functions as hiring, transferring, or dismissing employees. So, obviously there's a little bit of a conflict there. I think what Dr. Gant just explained is, that is the GSBA training. And if you haven't already done it, and when you do your new board member orientation, that what Dr. Gant just said is what you will hear, is how that's reconciled.
So just for a little bit of clarity, I wasn't asking about do we receive granular information about the personnel on the lists. That wasn't my question at all. And I did do the orientation, so I fully understand that that's not a thing. My question was more just about the broader picture of understanding, what positions are missing, where are we in the health of our instructional staff, where are we in the health of our custodial staff, where are we, so I don't have that information. So when we're looking at these personnel lists, it would be good to understand that background of the health based on personnel to really kind of be able to look at these documents and say, oh, well, this makes sense, this looks right, this looks appropriate. And I just don't feel like I have that information at all.
So generally, Mrs. Duke would provide an update during hiring season of how many vacancies we have, how many people we've hired, how many more positions we need. And then sometimes, she'll do that even like at the end of a year, when she'll say that we have these many people resign, these are how many positions we have to fill. And then throughout the summer, she would just do a pulse check with the board on where we are with filling those positions in terms of admin, classified, and certified. And then we always get that information when school is beginning back to where we are in terms of being ready and fully staffed. Throughout the year, maybe when she does her HR quarterly report, if it's her turn to do a report, she would share that information, but it's not presented like each month on an update, but usually at times when you would have larger number of vacancies.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that information. That was very helpful.
You're welcome.
Let me share one more situation. If you are related to someone that's on this list, then you don't want to violate the code of ethics and vote for that person. And so in that situation, we would contact the superintendent and ask that that person be voted on separately so that you can recuse yourself from that vote.
And if there is like a position, like a district level position, I always would share that information with you all in advance, like I did recently, let you know who is being recommended, give you some information on them. Of course, we don't do that with all certified and classified positions. If there is a principal being hired, something of that nature, we would provide you with more information and insight prior to, and not just have it on the list.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Okay. We'll move forward with item number 11. And these are the things that are right now are scheduled to be on our consent agenda, but we'll go through each one. And if people would prefer to pull these off or have additional questions, then that probably can't be answered tonight, then that probably means we need to have it pulled off. So item 11.1 is our January 7th work session minutes.
Consent.
Okay. Sort of, I'm just looking across the view just to be sure. Okay.
Yeah, that's easy, guys. All you gotta do is say consent first. Unless you want to pull it off.
11.2, and these are January 14th board meeting minutes.
Consent. I beat you.
Yay. I'm not even in a contest about this. That's the funny thing. I'm not even in a contest. Okay.
All right. Okay, I don't see or hear anyone asking to pull this off. 11.3, and this is our academic calendar that was discussed earlier.
I think we need to pull this one off.
Okay. All right, so we have at least one person wanting to pull it off. So we'll pull that off. Ms. Palmer and Dr. Thomas, if you can make a note of that.
We've got it. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And 11.4, this is our the high school program of study for 2021-2022. And if I'm not mistaken, this was sent to us earlier, I think.
Yeah. Mr. Gaskins, do you need to just give any information about how this comes up annually?
I can. Excuse me. I did put it in the board update last Friday. The program of study is really two things. So on page 7 of this booklet, it identifies the courses that are required for graduation. So there is a DOE policy that says that the board must approve the program of study. That's the, excuse me, as the state defines program of study, it is the courses needed for graduation. The program of study has not changed since last year. We did make a revision to this program of study where we added multicultural literature as that 12th grade course that students could take. That came from our 12th grade teachers saying that students were not as interested in British Lit. Students can still take British Lit towards graduation, but the program of study, the course that we offer towards graduation is multicultural education. And that really is the only update in the last 2 years. And then the rest of the program study is actually the program of study booklet, which is our local policy that we approve every year. And it is a listing of the courses that are provided at our 3 high schools.
Can we just pull this? Yeah. I think it just deserves a separate vote because it's so impactful to who we are and what we do. And so I like to see those, I personally prefer to see those things voted on individually.
Agree.
So we have, we have someone, 2 people have asked for this to be pulled off of consent. Okay. And Ms. Palmer, Dr. Thomas, if you can make a note of that.
Yes, ma'am.
I will encourage you, if you have any follow-up questions or specifics. I do know that the calendar will be out, and actually both of these. And so it's possible that we may receive some feedback or public comment, but any of the questions that you already have, if you have any additional questions, please reach out to Dr. Thomas before next week, so that those questions can be addressed to the degree that they can be for our efficiency next week at our regular board meeting. Okay. And so we have 2 items that were pulled off of the consent agenda and 2 items that remain on there. All right. Any additional questions before we move, or discussion before we, around any of these, before we move to item number 12, which is adjournment?
No, thank you very much. I like that addition of the multicultural literature. And so I know that that one typically wakes our community up. And so let's have that conversation. And so that explanation that you offered was very good, especially with it coming at the recommendation of the staff, of the teachers, or of your team. I think that's really important, that we signal that inclusiveness that's happening with that literature. Starts to hit on our cylinder for equity.
Okay, thank you. If there are not any additional questions, we will move forward and open the floor for a motion for adjournment.
Have I intimidated y'all? I so move.
Second.
Okay, I'm sorry. Who was that? Okay, I heard Ms. Davis for the motion. Is that on the second?
Me, Mumbies.
Okay, Dr. Anderson. All right.
My first one.
Awesome. I don't see any objections or questions in my screen. So what that means is that